Canadians decided to hand the keys back to the people who drove us into this mess. And boom, we're live. What's up, everybody? Couple Casuals podcast. I'm your host, Stefano. And guys, I got an update for you. For the Canadians out there, I'm sure you have been pretty tuned in to what has been happening lately politically. And in today's conversation, we're going to be discussing that. Now, I'm a little bit upset. I'm not as energetic or as excited as I usually am. And you probably know why. But I'm going to start here. I'm going to start with something for you guys, okay? When I started this podcast, I never planned on talking about politics. I didn't really anticipate to be discussing about politics as much as I have. But with everything that was going on, in particular that time, there was COVID and there was so much government intervention in our lives and some crazy policies that were getting passed and talked about and just government intervening in Canadians' lives like I've never seen before. So I used my voice to speak about those things. Now, some of you resonate with that and some of you don't. But as time went on, I continued to talk about politics because I garnered like somewhat of a passion for it. And it made me a little bit motivated to look at what the other side of the coin could look like for this country of Canada. Okay. So time went on discussing politics, policies, having some amazing guests on and discussing these topics in length and having these solo episodes with you guys talking about this exact election that just unraveled. Now, where that leads me to is I had a sense of optimism over the past year, especially the past 6 to 8 months. I had a sense of optimism looking at Canada and really trusting that Canadians had a hard look at what has happened to this country in the past 9 years under this current Liberal government. And they really let it sink in and that it would be considered when they go to the voting box. Okay? I had optimism that Canadians wouldn't be fooled when the Liberal government took out Justin Trudeau and installed Mark Carney. And I had optimism that Canadians would see through it and understand the discrepancies and understand the inconsistencies and understand the similarities. I had optimism that Canadians wouldn't fall for the fear tactics and the narratives that the mainstream media push forward, especially as of recently in regards to Donald Trump. I had optimism that our country was going to change, that we finally realized what has happened under this Liberal government for the past 9 years was not good and it wasn't serving our country's best interest. I had optimism that what happened in the United States recently with Donald Trump, now specifically being the overwhelming mandate that he received from the American voters, showing that the West in general was going in a direction of salvation, was going in a direction of change. I had optimism about that. But, as many of you know, Canadians made their decision. Canadians decided that for a fourth consecutive time, all the things that happened over the past 9 years was okay. And that it was at our best interest to do more of the same. Canadians decided to hand the keys back to the people who drove us into this mess. Now, as many of you know, what I'm getting at is recently the Canadian federal election took place. And once again, Canadians decided to elect the Liberals. After everything we've been through, after 9 years of inflation, high taxation, increased crime, government intervention like we've never seen on individuals' lives, censorship through the roof, a stronghold and a hindering government grappling effect on the oil and gas industry, and just a list of an abundance of other things, Canadians decided that the Liberals were the best choice forward. Now, as I sit here and talk to you guys right now, I just can't believe it. I was just talking to to my buddy Dean, who I have here with me. And I was saying, we sat in this chair many times discussing this politics, discussing the Canadian election. And yet, we're back again, Dean. We're back again, but this time with some sad news that for once again, like I said in the intro, on April 28th, the Canadian federal election took place, and Canadians have decided to give the Liberals power once again. Okay? So the Elections Canada says over 19.5 million people voted, which translates to almost 69% of the populace. This was the most since 1993. All right, guys, I got a quick one for you. I've got to tell you about the best Canadian-made gear I know, Mud Monkey. You want badass Canadian-made apparel that actually stands out? Well, Mud Monkey's got you covered. They have top-tier quality, outdoor-ready fits and bold designs that drop fresh every single month. I got a couple of their products with me right now. I'm wearing their t-shirt, and I'll throw up some pictures of some other products that they have. Their designs are amazing, and the quality is fantastic, guys. And for the whole month of May, it's tax-free. So head over to mudmonkeystore.com. That's mudmonkeystore.com and use promo code CCPOD15. That's CCPOD15 at checkout for 20% off your final purchase. Support local, look mint, and enjoy. Salute. Now, we're going to talk about so much different stuff, guys, and I'm going to list some of these things that we get into, but I just want to get opening thoughts from you, Dean, to just kind of set us off here. I had to give that little bit of a monologue intro and just unload some of my feelings there, but what are your opening thoughts with what the hell just occurred in the past week or so?
I think it's disappointing. I think to anybody who's really paying attention, it's, if you're looking at the polls, you kind of saw maybe this could be a possibility, right. But it's ununderstandable. I can't understand it, how people could vote for the Liberals again. And for Mark Carney specifically, like, he is one of the worst candidates to have in. And I get it. If you're looking like 1%, 2% surface level, he looks like a calm, older gentleman.
That's how they sold him, right?
Yeah,
polished banker can solve the economic issues.
The calm, reasonable choice versus the Donald Trump Jr. with black hair instead of orange hair.
That's how they sold it.
So it's just disappointing to see that there's so many people that are so easily fooled by lies and propaganda. Quite a bit, actually. Well, obviously the majority.
Yeah, obviously, the Liberals almost getting a majority government, which will lead me to some of the things that I kind of want to open up with here. Then I'm going to get into what we're going to talk about in today's conversation. But just to set the premise here, guys, I am going to be discussing data-driven particulars in this conversation. I'm going to be discussing some public opinion polling, some polling numbers that we discussed a little bit on this podcast previous to the election. So I'm going to have some metrics for you guys. We'll discuss some analytics along with some other perspectives. But just to lay the foundation, as we know, the Liberals won, mentioning 69% of the populace voted. That's the most since 1993. That just shows you that Canadians are engaged with politics right now. But as to why, we're going to find out in today's conversation. So the Liberals finished with a total of 169 seats, coming short of a majority by 3 seats. 172 you need in Canada to get a majority. Even with everything that the Liberals done in this country, Canadians still trusted them enough to almost give them a majority government, which is very interesting. I have to say, I didn't expect that. The Conservatives finished with a total of 144 seats, gaining 24 seats from the previous standing. So showing some interesting ground covered and increased seats for the Conservative Party of Canada. But once again, not doing enough to get over the goalposts. And we'll talk about that in today's conversation, okay? And the NDP ended with just 7 seats, losing 17 seats, which we knew was going to happen with Jagmeet Singh absolutely selling out his party and selling out the country, basically forfeiting the NDP by forming this coalition, which basically consolidated the two parties, which made Canadians confused as why am I going to vote for the NDP when I can just vote for the Liberals, which they overwhelmingly did, which leads to why they ended the way they did. A lot of NDP voters, they didn't vote for the NDP this time around. They voted for the Liberals because they wanted to beat the Donald Trump Jr., as you said, Dean. And the bloc ended with a total of 22 seats. This leaving us with another minority government, guys. Okay, here we are again, back at square one with another minority government that will continue to likely retrieve support from the Do-Nothing Democrats, aka the NDP, which will secure a locked coalition between the Liberals and the NDP, along with the already very, very stacked Liberal Senate, which a lot of people don't talk about, Dean. That's what the fight to get the leadership for Pierre Poilievre was just a part of the battle. But then after that, we would have to stay engaged and continue the fight because the Liberal Senate is absolutely stacked. The Liberal Senate is exactly what it is. But what I meant to say was the Senate is absolutely stacked with Liberal appointees. A lot of people don't know this, but since the Liberals have been in power in 2015, Trudeau advised 100 out of 105 members in the Senate. And the Senate is supposed to be a nonpartisan body but in reality, many members have clear Liberal ties, and some are even formal Liberal MPPs. So they're supposed to be, not involved with any political party, nonpartisan, but in reality, their Liberal ties are pretty strong. Okay, and this is where, in the Senate, the members of the Senate are actually responsible for reviewing legislation, amending and approving bills, and investigating issues. They hold the government accountable. So 100 out of 105 of those people were elected by Trudeau. Isn't that amazing? So my point is that the Liberals getting into power was just a very unfortunate part because Conservatives needed to get into power, and then the fight needed to continue to find ways around this, which we see with the Senate being stacked with Liberals. So that is one of the main issues I wanted to open up with. So it's not very positive, but I promise you guys, we're going to end this podcast on a positive note, and just stick around to the end and I'll tell you exactly why. A little bit of unfortunate news opening up in the gate here, but this is the reality. This is where we are. The fight continues. At the end of the day, we have to keep on trucking, as they say here in Canada, all right? So this is where we're at. I wanted to lay down that foundation so we really understand where Canada stands, because that is important. We need to understand where we are so we can see where we want to go. Okay, guys? So in today's conversation, we will discuss in very zoomed-in resolution, we'll discuss how this happened. How did the Liberals win again after 4 consecutive terms of destroying this country? Well, 3 consecutive terms of destroying this country, and now this being the 4th. So how did they do it? How did the Liberals win again? We're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss the Donald Trump controversy surrounding that and how that weighed in on this Canadian election. We're going to discuss the Liberals' plan and what we can expect. And then lastly, we'll discuss Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, the good, bad, and the ugly. What went wrong? What went right? And we will just get into some interesting things there. And then at the end, I got some things I want to talk about as well. We'll end off on a positive note. But let's discuss how this happened. Just coming out the gate, open dialogue here, Dean. What are your thoughts? I'm sure we'll cover some of these topics, but just seeing the past 2 weeks even and comparing it from previous, why did Canadians vote for the Liberals again?
I think it was perfect timing. It was a great time for the Liberals to peddle some fear about the tariffs and Donald Trump and how we don't want him. And, like I call him Donald Trump Jr., according to some people in our country. So you goddamn better not vote Conservative, because that's a vote for Donald Trump Canada.
They made those ties for sure.
Yeah. So I think it was a lot of fear mongering and a lot of lies and people just making assumptions about the Conservative Party basically holding the same values as Donald Trump in some American red states.
I see, we're going to talk about Donald Trump and the tariffs too, but a lot of people are going flippy-floppy on this issue and whether Donald Trump played a role into this election. I think without a doubt, he definitely did.
Yeah.
Now, whether we can say it's Donald Trump is putting America first and he's doing what he has to do, but the Canadians are the ones who subscribed to it and who fell for it, so to speak. So he's one person, right? You can't control him. He does what he has to do. But it's us who receive that information and then vote on the premise of what has actually happened, some of the issues that we're experiencing, or the fear and the concern of the big bad Donald Trump. So we're going to discuss all of that, guys, in great detail. But this election was the chance that Canadians had to change the tides, to save this country from the ever-growing censorship, inflation, rise in crime, the big government, housing crisis, and the bloated bureaucracy. And we had a chance to unleash the oil and gas industry and basically save Canada. But they didn't. So how and why? And today we're going to discuss exactly that. The most captivating part is the fact that Canadians decided to vote Liberals again after a decade of the worst leadership this country has ever seen. Okay? And this tells a bigger story. And this is a point I want to make. And you tell me if you agree, Dean. This tells us that the Liberals really do have a strong hold on Canadians, more than we thought. Otherwise, how would we elect the same people that got Canada into this current disaster, and how would they be able to psyop Canadians into voting for them again for a fourth term? There's an interesting point that I've been navigating. And it's when you zoom out and you look at like reality, like I listed, right? The rise in crime, the censorship, the inflation, the housing crisis, the bloated bureaucracy, the inability to unleash the oil and gas industry with the overwhelming environmental regulations. When you look through all these things, and most people know this because not too long ago, which we'll discuss, the Conservatives were winning pretty significantly. But the Liberals have figured out a way to psyop Canadians into voting for them again for a fourth term. I just can't believe it. Do you think that they have done the correct things to put the system in place, whether it's the control on the liberal propaganda machines we know as the mainstream media, to target Canadians' fears? Do you think they have put the system in place? And then we'll talk about immigration too, and filling these cities that have heavy seat ridings, etc. Do you think they put the system in place to be able to win no matter what? Because like think about what they did in the past 9 years. Canadians know. They know because the polling not that long ago showed that they knew, right?
Yeah.
Did they curate this system to put us in a point where now there's literally no turning back? They got it locked.
I don't think it's quite that far yet, but I think it's well on the way. I think, similar to what happened in the United States with the Democrats, they're importing voters at record numbers. And, if you're a recent immigrant and you got here on the liberal paycheck or the liberal boat, you're not going to drill holes in the boat that brought you here. You're going to wait and keep voting in the same kind of politicians that got you here and get your family here and all that kind of stuff. But, both of us have families of immigrants. There's nothing wrong with immigrants, but if you don't do it in a controlled manner, you end up with hospitals with, lines out the door, police services that can't handle their jurisdictions anymore. And we don't have the money to increase those services at the rate that we're importing people into the country. So
that's right. And they caused a tremendous amount of damage. And I think Canadians forgot about that right away. So you know what I'm going to do, Dean? I'm going to list through some of the things that they did causing damage and some data that I pulled. And starting with a 2024 Fraser Institute marked Canada's GDP growth at a horrid growth of 1.4% over the past decade, putting us last on the G20. Just starting with that, obviously that is an issue and that we're not doing well. So this should indicate that we need to make a change. But they figured out a way around that, didn't they? Okay. So with the current and new liberal policies, we are forecasted to have the worst economy out of all 38 OECD nations for the next 40 years, with no clear liberal plan to change this around. Liberals drove record high immigration, which you just added, Dean, adding 1.3 million immigrants to this country in 2023. There will also be another 400,000 permanent residents in this year alone, with no clear plan of how we will house, afford them, and build all the infrastructure to support them. Like you mentioned not too long ago, Dean, the healthcare system. When you have all these people coming in, they need healthcare. The growth is so rapid that we can't sustain it. We are not able to house everybody. We're not able to support everybody. We're not able to care to everybody with the healthcare system. As you can hear in the background there, there's just too many people that need help. But the healthcare system itself is strained and it's overrun, okay, partially due to the immigration crisis that we are experiencing and from the handicap numbers and weak liberal borders that we are succumbing to. According to the Fraser Institute, again, in 2024, the median wait time for a referral by a general practitioner to the receipt of treatment was 30 weeks. This is a 22% increase compared to the 9.3 week patient waited time in 1993. Also, for example, in 2023, more than 1.3 Canadians left the emergencies room without being seen due to excessive wait times and capacity issues. So imagine this, the taxpayer that goes to work, they spend all the money and they pay into these systems to be able to have socialized healthcare, to be able to have healthcare, free healthcare, as you call it. And the Liberals are bringing in so many people at such a fast, rapid pace that the average person is now waiting an average time of 30 weeks which is a 222% increase since the 90s, okay? 1.3 million people left the emergency rooms. How many times, Dean, have you, I hope you haven't had to go on often, but go to the hospital and you're just like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah, I think the last time I was actually in the emergency room, I was there for like 6 hours. I wasn't a massive emergency.
It's at that point
still.
now. It's in Canada.
Yeah.
You know that if you go to the hospital, it's a guaranteed wait time of like 4 to 6 hours, which that I remember in boxing, I fractured my rib. It popped out. The first thing I thought about was, oh my God, I'm going to have to go to the hospital
To sit there
and have to fucking wait there for the longest time ever.
Yeah.
Like, that's not exactly good. It's just, that doesn't make any sense. So there's consequences for Liberal policies and the damage that has been done. So let's continue. Crime. Let's talk about crime. Crime is up in all metrics. Violent crime is up 41%. Homicides up 37%. Automobile theft is up 45%. And violent firearm offenses are up 116%. Now, the interesting thing about the firearm offenses, guys, is you know who the one who's committing firearm offenses? Criminals. You want to know what the Liberals did in response to that? They went after the decent, tax-paying gun owner, legal gun owner, Canadian citizen. That's who they went after, okay? They went after them, and in response to these crimes, they went after them, and the Liberals went after the legal gun owners with Bill C-21, requiring mandatory buyback programs, increasing red flag laws, and moving government intervention with your right to own firearms. Instead of aiming to resolve the real issues with the actual crimes and the criminals being committed, like the weak Liberal bills, Bill 75 and Bill C5, the Liberals ignored that and said, we have to, the people that we have to go after, not the ones who are directly responsible for it, we have to go after the legal gun owner. They capitalized on the catastrophe that was happening, and they went after the legal gun owner. Let's continue. Censorship. Censorship laws have increased significantly with promises that Carney is going to expand them. Bills like Bill C-11 and Bill C-18, those are going to be expanded as they have already hindered speech and sharing of information on social media. We saw through this election the Liberals talking about we have to stop misinformation. This is exactly how they're going to do it. So, Dean, we might be out of a job soon. We might not be having this podcast very soon, bro. I don't know what the hell's going to happen with this, man. It sucks, guys, when I'm just thinking about it, reading through this stuff. I have so much data, so I want to run through it, guys. But it's just incredible that we're at this point. The Liberals also radically increased the federal bureaucracy by 40%. And they also brought our deficit to $61.9 billion, exceeding the initial projection of $40 billion. The deficit being the government spending exceeding the revenue. So that is a significant number, guys, okay? We got high taxes, including the carbon tax, which Carney decided, the carbon tax actually doesn't work. Weeks before the election, he decided to take it off. So Canadians went to the pump and they looked and they're like, oh my God, gas is at a record low. This is amazing. I haven't filled up my tank like this in a while. Not realizing, not making the connection that the Liberals are the ones who put it in there, and they literally could have done that at any time. Do you think that worked for them, Dean?
I think the important part to note is also he didn't eliminate the carbon tax. He made it from what it was to 0%, which can easily turn back up to 2 to 3 to 4% as he feels necessary. As he has the political power, he can dial that up at his will.
There you go, guys. So that's a very good point. The Liberals didn't actually remove the carbon tax, but they're still going to have the industrial carbon tax, which we'll talk about. It's going to get into, it will trickle down to the consumer. There's going to be many issues that are going to come with the price and pollution, because this is a guy, Mark Carney, that is a net zero crazy person. He highlights it all in his book called Values. He wants to implement policies and legislation that is going to decimate the oil and gas industry in Canada. That's why Alberta's pissed and they want to separate from Canada. Did you see that, Dean?
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Danielle Smith coming out and basically issuing, like, we're going to try to work with Ottawa, but if they don't work with us, because that's an energy-rich part of the province, like they're getting absolutely hindered in their growth, and the people are paying for it.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
They're looking to separate, which is messed up.
Yeah,
when you think about it.
Not a good thing when the provinces are just talking about separating, even if it's like a far-fetched idea. Not a good place to be in the country where the certain states or provinces are talking about separating.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about the United States, is that if you agree with, or if you disagree rather, with your current governor, you can just go over to Texas, a Republican state, or the opposition.
Yeah.
But we don't have that option here. and Alberta wants to maybe implement that. But yeah, he's a guy that's going to really affect our bank accounts, especially when it comes to the price on pollution. So he said Canadians are not smart enough to put it together that I'm going to move the carbon tax to 0% by not actually removing it, because legislation is required when you have to actually get rid of the carbon tax. I'm just going to put it to 0%, make them see the effects at the pump. I'm the good guy, Mark Carney, and then later on I'll go and put it back. Mark my words right now, that's exactly what he's going to do. Let's talk about immigration, okay? The Liberals flooded Canada. There's nothing wrong with immigration as a whole, but in the rate that it was coming in has overwhelmed and stressed our systems, as we've already discussed, but we're going to discuss more. They flooded Canada. In 2023, as mentioned before, the Liberals allowed 1.3 million immigrants into Canada. Specifically, the country welcomed almost 500,000 permanent residents, making this the highest intake in Canadian history. This is not to mention the illegal crossings. This is not to mention the overstayed student visas. This is not to mention everything else. This is just that one documented portion. The country is stressed. The country is overwhelmed. Our system is overwhelmed. But Canadians decided, let's do the same thing that we've always done. Let's elect the Liberals, and we'll discuss why. Public opinion polling also shows that 78% of Canadians believe the current immigration rates are too high and they contribute to housing and affordability crisis. Yet Canadians still decided to vote for Liberals, and we're going to discuss why. Canadians even elected previous Liberal MPs like Immigration Minister Sean Fraser after his literal catastrophe in handling of the immigration progress. Can you imagine that, Dean? Chrystia Freeland was reelected.
I saw that. I had to pinch
She froze
myself.
Canadians' bank accounts.
Yeah.
Sean Fraser was elected. He destroyed the immigration system. Stephen Guilbeault, a radical freaking activist who climbed the CN Tower at one point before getting into government, he was reelected. All this because of Trump and the new Polish Mark Carney, which we'll discuss in detail. But this is unbelievable. So after all this, plus much more, Canadians decided to go with this Liberal government again. So we need to figure out why. So they decided to elect them again. So let's discuss why. Well, first off, they control the media. Let's be honest there. We know that. The media government is subsidized and they dictate the narrative. The government subsidies in the liberal media is unbelievable. CBC's budget will increase to $1.53 billion. They regulate the discontent with the extensive censorship bills. They secured the votes from the metropolitan cities and the mass immigration / government dependency. And they understand that Canadians can sometimes be weak with their emotions. So that's exactly how they did this. They control the narrative. They steer the ship. They implement the fear. They run the media, so every single person is only getting one source of information, especially the boomers, which we'll talk about. And the Liberals have brought in so much immigration. And as you mentioned earlier, Dean, these individuals tend to be, most of them, or some of them, reliant on the government for funds and support that they always end up voting Liberal. This is a slow restructuring of our system as we know it, and it's silently creeped up in authoritarianism. It is distracted by fake virtue, Canadian sovereignty, and the external threats or danger that the media was espousing. This time, it being Donald Trump. So let's break it down. Donald Trump. There has been so much controversy. I don't know. Have you heard of anybody's name more than Donald Trump in Canadian news in the past little while? This election was because they made this election because of Donald Trump. Do you not agree?
Yeah, definitely. I think the Liberals won like the lottery when he announced tariffs and people started to get extra agitated about him and the United States.
It's insane because the Canadians literally voted on Donald Trump. He was a big part of this Canadian election. So we have to break this down, guys. We have to understand how this affected the Canadian election because some folks say, like Patrick Bet-David's a big one of this. He's a big proponent of if you think Donald Trump was the deciding factor of the election, you're wrong. It was on Pierre Poilievre, which I agree that accountability needs to be taken, which we'll discuss in further details shortly. But to look at it and not think that Donald Trump had something to do with even what he was saying to then Canadians' response to that and the media just pumping down our throats about Donald Trump. I think it's fair to say that his name, his comments, they definitely played a role. And let's talk about why. He had a major effect on the trajectory of this election, mainly because at the end of 2024, in December and early January 2025, the Conservatives held a strong 26-point lead, which we discussed on this very podcast, that the Conservatives were up significantly, that in some speculations, the Liberals weren't going to even achieve official party status. So it has changed significantly since then. And what happened in between? Well, two major things happened, guys. Trudeau resigned, which as a consequence of Pierre's relentless work in the House of Commons, in Parliament, in the debates, on his social media, just relentlessly, just basically exposing to Canadians the damage that Trudeau has done. So I give him credit for that. But the two major things, one being Trudeau resigning and Carney then being installed as the new polished banker that's going to save this country. And then number two, Donald Trump and his tariff threats and the 51st state allegations or inspirations or aspirations, as you would call it, for him to attain Canada as the 51st state. These threats garnered a lot of attention and generated a lot of noise, which then eventually led to an election, which the Liberals had to shut down during that time period because they had to sort out their cabinet, which Canadians were nice and patient with. They let them do their thing while they figured everything out to then eventually elect those same Liberals who had to shut down government for multiple months while Trump was making these threats of the 51st state and the tariff things, okay? So let's start with Trump. In relation to my earlier point about the state-controlled media, the Liberal media spent months encouraging the narrative that the biggest threat to Canada, the biggest issue that we had, not the past 9 years of what they've done to this country, but the biggest threat was Donald Trump. Boomer voters in particular ate this up. For example, Abacus data poll shows that the most important deciding voting issue for boomers was dealing with Donald Trump. Other prompts and discussions and concerns were reducing cost of living, making housing more affordable, and growing the economy. So did you see that chart? I can maybe throw it up. Yeah, there was a chart that of a poll that went out that the most concern that people had was freaking Donald Trump. Can you believe that, Dean?
I called it on the other pod. If you remember, we talked about it, and I said the boomers don't give a shit because they've got a house and they're doing okay.
I remember.
Yeah.
They have equity in their home. They do not care about the young people in this country, obviously, because they voted for the people that have made it extremely hard for young people to own a home, etc. But Mark Carney was also pushed by the Liberal media as the new polished banker who is financially competent and poses the best chance at dealing with Donald Trump and saving our sovereignty. They really sold that message to everybody. He was presented as the proven economic steward in uncertain times, like you said earlier, Dean. The Liberals ran with these employing slogans like elbows up and making very odd and strange campaign commercials with Mike Myers. But it worked. This narrative, Dean, this narrative that we need to save our sovereignty of Canada, it took over the premise of this election. And I would argue that this election itself was called because they capitalized on that.
Definitely.
And it's just insane to think. The short-term memory of Canadians, unfortunately. It's really, really sad. But the combination between the mainstream media pushing the narrative of the threats and the fear rather than the actual memory of what actually unfolded in the past 9 years, this successfully enabled the biggest political Canadian election comeback in history. Again, Conservatives were up 26 points, and the Liberals came back and ended up winning an almost majority government. Can you believe that, guys? That is pretty strategic approach by the Liberals, capitalizing and having these things in place that allowed them to be able to do that. But there's one more major point that I want to highlight, okay? The Canadian electoral process is highly favored to almost always promise a Liberal victory. As long as we are held captive by Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, I don't see how our opposition stands a chance. Now, the Liberals have spent almost a decade essentially importing voters As we expanded earlier, Canada has drastically increased their immigration under the Liberal government. Over 5 million immigrants have been imported into Canada in a 10-year span from 2014 to 2024. Can you believe that? There's 40 million people that live in this country, guys. This has increased our population by 15%. We have to address the elephant in the room, man. The Liberals have allowed a tremendous amount of people to come into this country irregulated, just welcome in with Canada is the land of the free and the opportunity is for immigration. All our parents are immigrants. We understand that. But we see a trend here. The higher the population, the more seats that city gets, that riding gets. So one point that is worth mentioning is following the surge of this immigration, where do you think all these folks went? They went to Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. That's exactly where they went. And guess what? Those cities always vote. They vote Liberal almost every single time. The higher the population, the more seats. And with the Canadians' elections process, with the first to pass the post, the system is very flawed. And these cities collectively carry a significant number of ridings. We need to really understand that, guys. Nearly 30%. I'm going to say that again. Nearly 30% of all seats in Parliament come from just these three urban cities. The Liberals literally pay for immigrants to come in this country. They pay for newcomers. They give free money, free hotel stays, and each immigrant can earn up to $80,000 per year, which is more than you'll get from your old age security for a Canadian that has worked here their whole entire life. That seems odd. So it seems like they're saying, come here, we got a sweet gift for you, but remember who you got to vote for when the election comes around. And that's exactly what they're doing. So of course, these individuals are going to vote Liberal. Now, Dean, I'm going to come to you in a second. While the Canadian taxpayers fund this, the Liberals use your money because you pay the taxes. Taxes go to the government. The Liberals use your money to stay in power by funding this immigration crisis, because that's exactly what it is. So, Dean, with that being said, how do we move around this stronghold that we continue to succumb to? Now, the 905 belt surrounding Toronto really went blue this year, which was really good, which is really impressive. But again, these cities, Toronto, you live in Toronto. You got to represent Toronto now. You got to talk for us. You got to tell us what the hell's going on here. Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. Freaking 30% of Parliament, man. That is insane. How do the Conservatives get around that?
I don't know. I think it's going to be tough, but I mean, they were there. So it's not even a question of like, how do they do it? They were there. It's possible to do. I don't think it's like locked in specifically in those cities as a foregone conclusion that it's Liberal forever now, even with these extra immigrants. I think it's going to take another term of Liberal policies to really push over, similar to what we saw in the U.S., where Donald Trump won his initial election, then he lost, and then he destroyed the opposition in the recent 2024 election. So I think the exact same thing is going to happen here in Canada, whether it's Pierre again or a new candidate that arises within the next 6 to 12, 24 months. I don't think the Liberals have much longer to prove that they're able to lead this country effectively. I think once the Donald Trump effect wears off, they're toast. That's all they've got right now is smoke and mirrors and Donald Trump. Once that wears off, the tariffs are gone. What Canadians are going to remember? My paychecks are light, my taxes are high, and gas is expensive.
You would think that. And we had this conversation leading up to this election. We had this very conversation on this very podcast. You guys can watch the previous episodes. We discussed this, and we thought that. I was convinced. And you mentioned Donald Trump's mandate recently. I thought that was foreshadowing what we were going to experience. Did you think that at all?
I think this is the Biden-Trump election we just went through.
Okay,
and the next one is going to be the next version of that. So this time the Conservatives lost, but I think next time it's going to be an absolute landslide because the same policies are going to create the same effects and people are still going to be broke. They're still not going to be able to find a home, and the Donald Trump effect is going to wear off, and they're going to remember that. I
don't know what we do about the overwhelming amount of immigrants that are in this country. And again, no issue with immigration as a whole, but just incrementally. We need to adjust accordingly to the numbers, to the infrastructure. We don't have any accountability in that sense to be able to house even coming down here, there's traffic like crazy because we have so many people that we don't have the roads and infrastructure to be able to support the amount of people. So looking at these and 1.3 million people in 2023, in a way, would you agree with the statement that liberals are importing voters?
Definitely, at least trying to, yeah.
Because you look at this and you look at some of these numbers, they are giving free hotel stays money.
Yep.
They're giving them a significant amount of money. They get thousands of dollars for each child that they have. They can earn up to $80,000 per year, which is more than a Canadian taxpayer who worked their whole life and now retired. That seems off.
Yeah.
I don't know how long that goes for, so somebody can probably correct me on that. But when you look at those metrics, like they're almost guaranteed to always vote Liberal. So
the thing is, though, you can do that for so long, and then even the immigrants who are getting all this free stuff, eventually the free stuff runs out. We can't do it forever. So when the free stuff runs out and they realize, holy shit, this country is kind of shit right now. I know a lot of immigrants that are here within the last few years legally that wanted to vote Conservative and did vote Conservative. And, you know.
If I'm not mistaken, Brampton has significantly voted Conservative too.
Definitely, yeah. So I think it's you know, you can do your best to bring people in and give them free shit, but you can't force them to vote for you. If you do a shit job, even people who are getting free shit from you are going to say, this is enough. Like, free shit be damned. I need a country I can live in where people aren't getting broken into, and I might as well go back to my third world country.
Yeah, that's what's happening. The crime was a big one, and I can't believe Canadians overlooked that. And you know, maybe the boomers that overwhelmingly voted for the Liberals, they don't care about the crime either. I know they don't care about the housing crisis because they're good, but the crime was a big one. Like we see videos all the time of people breaking in to the homes of decent Canadians, and with no right to defend ourselves, and the laws in the criminals' favor. So like that one stuck out to me. That one was a tough one because it's like I have a home and I have a family too, and I think about the safety of them, and it's like how we can't even defend ourselves. It's just insane. But maybe they have it in their plan. We'll talk about the Liberals' plan now next. About what they plan to do to the crime. Little spoiler alert, they don't. Okay, so it's more of the same, guys. The Liberals' plan. Let's talk about their plan. Okay, their plan promises over $130 billion in spending over the next 4 years, adding $225 billion to the federal debt, with no plan to balance the budget in the near future. So there's one to just start us off. Okay. And this is all coming from their Liberal plan that came out recently, their economic plan, everything they released before the election. They will leave more government capital deficit, which will result in more government ownership over housing, resources, and energy. Carney and the Liberals already committed to not removing Bill C-69, which is the anti-energy bill that Alberta's pissed about, as we talked about earlier. And Canadians are pissed about because we have an immense amount of resources in this country and we're not using them. So the Liberals have already committed to maintaining their green agenda, increasing industrial carbon tax, which will trickle down to the consumer, and capping oil and gas. So that little bit of leeway that you got leading up to the election with the bringing down of the carbon tax, guys, don't get used to it, all right? That's all I got to say. Mark Carney has deep financial ties. This is why don't get used to it, because Mark Carney has deep financial ties to the progress of alternate energy, hence his aspirations for net zero. So to put it in layman's terms, green energy does better and we use it more, then Carney makes more money. And when I say do better, not for the environment, etc., we implement more of it, then Carney gets paid more. That's just the way it works because he has extensive amount of interest in it, which he highlights all his net zero aspirations in his book Values, along with other economic collapsing plans. Another part of the plan, like we discussed earlier, another 400,000 permanent residents this year alone. And guess where they're going to go? Montreal, Vancouver, Toronto. Housing supply is already crushed and our infrastructure cannot handle the current increased numbers. So how are we going to handle this? I have no idea. Maybe the Liberals are going to give us an idea, but so far they have not. Carney's plan is to throw more money at the housing issues that we are having. He plans to pour $35 billion into government-run programs, which he assures us will double the housing output, not accounting for our workforce, the slowed down bureaucracy that we have already in place that will almost certainly not allow the housing crisis to subside. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of talk, but they don't address the moving parts, which I thought Pierre did. He was going to incentivize the municipalities to build, move and cut the red tape. But Canadians didn't think so. They thought Carney was the better option, almost giving him a majority government, which I still cannot believe. The Liberals are going to increase the social programs, expanding the current ones that they already have with no account where this money is going to come from. So, guys, where are they going to get this money? In result, Carney will print more money. And what does that mean for Canadians? This will result in more inflation and more strain on the tax-paying Canadian consumer, who will also be victim to an increasing government size. Dean, what do you think about the Liberals' plan for the next 10 years? Or hopefully it's not another 10 years. What do you think about the Liberals' plan for the next term that they are alleged to supposed to run
I think
through?
even a teenager could tell you this ain't going to work. I think it's insane. I think a lot of it is going to cripple Canadians' wallets on a small level and in a big level. I think it's going to hurt our economy and really set the whole country up for a future that is not good.
And you know what? Again, it feels like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over expecting a different result. That's what I feel here in Canada.
Yeah.
To elect the Liberals again after 9 years, after all the things we've discussed, which we're coming to the end of the podcast now, guys, everything that we've discussed, to think, damn, these people that put us in this situation, they're the ones to help us get out of it. I don't understand. You almost got to give the Liberals credit that they were able to orchestrate this psyop and this just utilize the emotions and fear and the Donald Trump and the tariffs and all these things to get them back into power. Almost getting a freaking majority government. So that plan, guys, I don't know. In short, that plan is more of the same, if you ask me, and it's going to come from you, the tax-paying Canadian citizen. So it's not very optimistic. But again, like I said earlier, we're going to end on some optimism. Let's talk about the Conservatives and Pierre, okay? We have to talk about where it went wrong, some good, bad, and the ugly. Let's talk about the positives at first with Pierre and the Conservatives. The Conservatives gained 20-plus seats. They've grown their base significantly. A lot more young people are engaged with politics than they previously were. They got the greatest showing in the popular vote since Brian Mulroney, picking up over 8 million votes in total. Pierre and the Conservatives also picked up serious ground in Ontario, getting 44.5% of the vote. In particular, flipping a lot of the 905 belt area, which we talked about. So those were some positives. Dean, do you think those are enough positives that we ended off with, or do you think they should have done more?
I mean, they definitely should have done more. It wasn't enough to obviously sway the election here, but I don't know. I strongly think that the next election is going to be a landslide similar to what happened in the United States. Things are going to improve, so people are going to forget about what got them to quickly forget this time, and it's going to be over.
Yeah, the often critique that people have is that Pierre, and maybe we can unpack this just quickly, 2 seconds here. The often critique that people have is that Pierre didn't do these American podcasts like Joe Rogan. He didn't do Nelk. Nelk issued a statement too that they asked him many times to come on. He didn't do it. I look at that. I'll give you my thoughts. You give me yours. I look at that and I go, okay, now a lot of those podcasts, some of them are American, so I can easily see from Pierre's perspective, easy for the liberal media to go, see, he's working with Joe Rogan. That's with Donald Trump. Make that connection. Mm-hmm. Therefore, he's going to sell us out. We're going to be the 51st state under Pierre Poilievre. They can sell that message if he engages and has conversations on these American podcasts. Now, on the Canadian side, like Nelk Boys, for example, to do their podcast, who are they targeting? The young voters. Yeah. Who did he already have overwhelming support from? The young voters. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how much that would have done for him. And now I literally asked Pierre to come on this podcast multiple times throughout the podcast. He didn't get to me. He got to a couple other podcasts, but maybe that's something we can do in the future. I would love to. But you look at it and you just look and you go, I don't know how much he would have penetrated the boomer voters who were stuck on the fear of Donald Trump and everything with podcasts. What do you think about the podcast narrative?
Well, I think the podcast thing, I think certainly in the year 2025, you got to go do those. And I think even if they're American, the clips get out there, the information gets out there a little bit easier. Enough. So if you're only doing interviews that are being recorded at a town hall by major broadcast companies, and then they share 30 seconds of that or 45 seconds of that, all you've affected is the people in that room at that event. If he got on, let's say, Joe Rogan, which I'm sure he could have got on, I'm almost guarantee you that was a fault of his campaign managers, not Joe Rogan not wanting him. No way. So if he got on some of those larger shows, and he did Jordan Peterson and stuff like that, but you need more. You need an overwhelming wave of message.
It worked for Trump. We'll say that.
It worked for Trump, and it worked for everybody around him. RFK Jr., Elon Musk. Like, if you're listening to these people who are going on shows very often, you don't just get like, oh, he went on Joe Rogan. No, he went on Joe Rogan. He went on Nelk. He went on PBD. He went on blah, 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 blah. And you get to see his message 100 times over. It's like the advertising world. If you have one billboard, you might get somebody's attention. But if they see it, if you have like 20 billboards, they can't ignore it. So if he had his word out there, even if it was the same fucking message he was spreading on every show, I think he should have done more of that. And either it was on purpose or they just didn't think it was going to move the needle. But I think the more you can get your message out there when you're doing something correct, the better. So
that's a good point. And to what we were talking about earlier, right? What did you were saying that some Canadian female voters were worried about Pierre attacking reproductive rights, which that was not a part of his platform. He's never said that.
Never even up for
discussion. To your point, I'll let you tell the story quick if you want to touch on it quick. But to your point, if he got his message out there, now I'm just thinking lifetime, that's true. If he got his message out there by doing these podcasts, having the discussion, just hammering it, people would have known that. They would have known that he had no intention to go after reproductive rights or abortion rules, etc.
Yeah.
So maybe just tell us like what the misinformed Canadian voter. Like.
Yeah, I mean, I on the day of the election on the 28th, the morning, I just woke up like I always do, check Instagram, whatever, and I see a lot of my female followers and people that I follow posting silly things like, if you're looking to keep your reproductive rights, I hope that as a young woman in Canada you'll go out today and vote Liberal. But just different variations of that and other things, but mainly that one pissed me off because I knew it wasn't even up for discussion. It was not like they were thinking about maybe leaving it up to the provinces or wiggle room and maybe we'll do this and maybe we'll shorten the time span. He's not going to change a damn thing. So it irritated me. I posted about it and I said, listen, if you're going and voting because you think this is true, it's not. That's all I said, basically. And I posted a screenshot of the article. Yeah. I got messages with people still arguing with me. Like they couldn't handle doubling down, even though the facts were in black and white right from his mouth. I can guarantee you we're not changing any rules about the females' rights and to choose what happens with their body. And it was insane that the people were still arguing, well, he voted on this thing. Like, how could you trust a guy who didn't vote for free condoms on this bill? And it's incredible that people are associating free condoms and birth control with abortion rights. You can't seriously defend the fact that you want taxpayers to pay for your unprotected sex or your protected sex because you're not making enough money to buy condoms. So, but you have the right to have sex, and if somebody's going to buy me a condom, fuck it, I'll have babies, and then you guys can pay for that too. That's the attitude I was getting from some people in my inbox. And like we said earlier, if that's your number one concern in this election, you're doing all right, because there was a lot of other things that we should be focusing on. But that's a really what I ended up telling a lot of the girls is this is an emotional issue, and whether it's true or not, it gets you riled up and it gets you offended, and you don't even have to look into it. You just assume that if it's a conservative or a Republican, of course he's looking to do that. Of course he's homophobic and transphobic and blah, blah, that's blah, what they did. They make the connection. They make that connection, and if you're a horrible person, you vote for the conservative, and if you're a good person, you vote Liberal. Educated, yeah, exactly. Which is not the case anymore at all. Exactly. Like it's just insane. But yeah, so to your point, in summary, if he would have got on and maybe smashed some more podcasts and stuff, it would really have enabled him to get his message out more. So maybe that is one area that he could take accountability. So let's talk about some of the negatives. Okay, guys, the Conservatives have now lost 4 consecutive elections against the Liberals. Another basically majority government was achieved because there's an inevitable coalition that's going to take place between the NDP and Liberals, which will seamlessly allow them to move freely through Parliament and pass through legislation, which is a big concern. Pierre lost his seat that he held for 20 years. But it's worth mentioning that his riding significantly increased and expanded in 2023, merging with heavily liberal dense regions. I can't believe that. That was a big one. So Pierre Poilievre losing his seat. What did you think about that, Dean? He held that seat for 20 years, bro. Yeah, I think, this is the first time that he's probably had to get so public with his opinions and put his face out there. And I don't even think his opinions are something that you shouldn't vote for, obviously, but I voted for him. But obviously you get out there on the public stage and you're going to have more negative press. And I think he didn't have to deal with that when he was just, going for the local MP. And I think this kind of put him on the main stage, and he was a lot of negative things were hurled at him and his name. And also, did you see his ballot? There was like maybe 100 fucking people.
Yeah, there
on
was
his ballot.
91 people on his ballot, which is insane. There was like a protest. It was a protest ballot. They implemented their names as protest. I don't know how that works, to be honest. I'm still learning.
There's
about
just
politics.
a lot of independents running, so they put themselves on the ballot.
The ballot was
they officially
massive.
Ran. Yeah.
But then, to be fair, on the other side of the coin, then the other candidate can be the, well, just as you have to find his name, you have to find mine too. Which it's just something that's just crazy. But in 2023, the area of Carleton, where he was the sitting MP, it expanded significantly, and it expanded with the Liberal region. So it condensed all these Liberals. So imagine the area being this big.
Yeah.
It just got this big, but all this was full of Liberals, and it increased. That area increased nearly 50% by immigration. So again, back to that point. So that was pretty crazy to see. So, let's talk a little bit about what's going to happen now. So now Pierre can still stay on as the leader, as the Conservative Party, even though he lost his seat. But without a seat in Parliament, he will not be able to participate in any debates, votes, or question periods. To get his seat back, he can wait for an MP to resign and then run a by-election, or basically ask a member to forfeit their seat, which is probably what's going to happen. This process can take up to 2 to 6 months. So that's pretty long, Dean, to not have Pierre in there, the official opposition. That's going to be interesting to see how that works. Mark Carney, for example, he didn't have a seat either. He was a banker coming in, new polished guy. The Liberals say, let's install him. He took a seat from Chandra Arya in the PM, where that individual was bullied out and forced out by the Liberal Party, which nobody talked about that as well. So you imagine he didn't have a seat. That was a Liberal strong area. Guaranteed know that he's going to win that area. The Liberals forced Chandra Arya out and installed Mark Carney in replacement. Mark Carney grew up in Edmonton. He didn't pick a riding over there. He picked a riding in a heavily Liberal area, which then got him the seat and kicked out this other guy. Insane how that happened, which nobody talked about too. That just shows and that Ruby Dahlia, what happened with her. Nobody talks about these things. The media doesn't talk about that. The media was talking about Trump every time. They didn't have time to talk about these other items and how showing the discrepancies and the very ethical, interesting, and taboo things that the Liberals were engaging with. Okay, it's also worth mentioning Jagmeet Singh, your best friend, Dean. I know you love Jagmeet Singh.
Yeah.
He also lost his seat, which concluded in him resigning with the NDP. Finally, no more Jagmeet Singh. Quick thoughts on that. What do you think?
I can't wait to never see his face again.
Can't wait to never see him again, eh?
Yeah.
The Maserati Marxist, the tough guy, is finally done with Canadian politics. He held Canadians captive for the past 2 years, forming a backdoor deal with the Liberals in a coalition. He is officially done. He didn't win his seat either. And lastly, the PPC once again split the vote. Unfortunately, Maxime Bernier, I'm sorry to say, I know you don't like when you hear that, but nearly 4 to 5 ridings that I saw just off the top of my head, the Conservatives lost by small margins, and they could have won, but those voters voted for PPC. They lost by hundreds of votes, that if the voters would have just voted Conservative rather than PPC, the Conservatives would have won, but they didn't. Last item I want to talk about with you guys here as we approach the 1 hour mark, I want to talk about Ontario and Doug Ford, okay? Because many Ontario and Canadian Conservatives are very upset with Doug Ford and the provincial Conservative leader of Ontario. Even Conservative MP Jamil Girvani, who used to work for him, went off on Doug Ford and how he inputted a lot of his comments and unwanted comments, that I would say, and his advice during the campaign. He did photo ops with Mark Carney and went for lattes with Chrystia Freeland, but not once did he meet with Pierre Poilievre. There seems to be some sort of internal battle between the province and the federal Conservatives, the provincial Conservatives and the federal Conservatives. Have you been following that at all? Did you see anything like
just bits and pieces here and there? It's but yeah, of course, I think Ford is leaning into probably running for prime minister.
I've heard speculations of that. Not a lot of Conservatives are very happy with Ford and how he weighed into that. Like, for me, looking at it, I'll be honest, I voted for Ford. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'll ever vote for him again after this recent election, man. I know then ultimately who you're voting for, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I got to be honest with you, I'm upset too. He freaking didn't support the federal government at all, the Conservatives, instead was doing, like I said, photo ops with Mark Carney and getting lattes with Chrystia Friedland. What the hell is that about? Like that seems like you're working with the enemy. At the end of the day, we are trying to achieve a mission here. We are on a mission, rather. We're trying to achieve a goal. Why not support the federal Conservatives? Why not help them? There has to be some internal things going on there. Like you said, Dean, maybe he is looking to run and take Pierre's spot. But that pretty much leads me to the end. I know it's a lot of information, guys. I want to end on some optimism, though. Where the Conservatives are headed next, I think, is in a positive direction. We gained 20 plus seats. We've had the biggest showing in the popular vote since Brian Mulroney. A lot of young Canadians are very engaged with politics, in particular with the Conservatives. They're the smarter ones than the boomers, in my opinion. I think the future looks bright. The fight continues. It may have not unfolded the way we wanted, but we are showing signs of progress. Did the Conservatives make mistakes and could have done better? Of course, you have to take accountability and look back at it and go in retrospect. This is where we could have corrected it, and hopefully they review the path that they took and make the corrections where they can. But I have to end on optimism. I have to end on the future of Canada may lie in the Liberals' hands for the next 4 years if we don't go to an election before that. I'm hoping that we possibly do. But after that, it could be a Conservative majority. It could be the Conservatives to come in and hopefully help aid this country back to being a good country, to being a great country, to being a prosperous country, to being a safe country once again. I'm very optimistic about that, and I hope that is the case. Dean, I'm going to give you the last couple notes just on the election, just on everything before I go into salute.
Well, I would say if you're disappointed, just keep your head up. I mean, the country isn't exactly going to go up in flames. Just, it's going to be more of the same. So buckle in, tighten the belt, and wait for the elections to come again.
Yeah, guys, and just keep your head up, keep your chin up. The fight continues. That's what it is, and I guess that's what leads me to the final segment on Couple Casuals podcast, which I call Salute, which I will give to you guys today. My salute is to keep on fighting, to keep on trucking, to keep on rocking, and to keep on rolling. We live to fight another day. This country is a beautiful country. Our aim to reestablish Canadian pride is still very much alive and well. And even though the Liberals found a way to implement one of the biggest comebacks in Canadian politics history, the Conservatives will do the same, and hopefully tenfold. So with that being said, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for everything. Thanks for listening to the politics conversations, because I really enjoy these, and I'm hoping to have some really interesting guests coming on very soon. Until next time, I love you guys, nobody else. Salute.